Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy Jonathan Macri with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School podcast. We are recording this a little bit after noon time on Thursday, March 27th, which means my guest today has about, let's do some quick math, 33 hours until he becomes a very nervous individual. We'll talk about that in a bit. He is, of course, senior writer for ESPN, New York Times bestselling author of Blood in the Garden, the best damn sports book to come out in many, many years. Chris Herring, are you nervous yet about tomorrow night, or are you taking it in stride?
You know what? I think not all, because certainly there are people that are better at this than I am. I'm not the biggest Michigan basketball guy. I've been really fair weather about them the last couple of years. I feel like I've poured every ounce of care into football. Even this year, coming off a national title win the season before and feeling like, okay, they've got 4 guys that could be first rounders. They've got other guys that are really good. They should win like 9 games, maybe 10 games. They could have done that. They ended up winning 8, but they, even with this depleted situation, beat Ohio State, who then won the title. So I feel like even just the ability to keep the Ohio State win streak going, I poured so much into that. And then I will readily admit, college basketball season happening during the NBA season is tough. College football is a little easier because it's a set. The games are on Saturday and that's it. I can set time aside for that. It's harder to follow that during college basketball when it's also during NBA season, and my focus obviously has to be here. So I'm not a diehard. I did watch the last couple games.
Fun game.
Really, really fun game. Both. The A&M game was kind of crazy too, but I will not pretend to be like an expert on that. I actually don't watch much college ball because I think it's just, there are people that I don't know how they find the time to scout these guys and pay attention to the league. Like Sam Vecini is.
I was about to bring up Sam.
There's other people like that. I don't get how, but I'm in awe of people that can kind of pay attention and be really knowledgeable on both, because it's too much for me. But I am going to watch, and I'm hopeful, certainly.
There are many things that have changed in my world as Knicks content creator since I started doing this. But easily the biggest one is that, like, it doesn't seem that long ago that by like game 20, I mean, who am I kidding? By game 1, it was like, all right, who are the top prospects? Oh, wait, Phil traded away our pick, or whoever traded away our pick. No,
different times.
I should know this off the top of my head if Phil actually, I don't think Phil, it was Isaiah really who traded the majority of the picks away. But I digress. Yeah, it's better now. The Knicks are good, and we're going to talk about this nice and good team. And yet that's kind of, I want to start with that notion because
that was the best way to put it, maybe.
It's so. Can we just like? I need to just get your opinion on something.
Sure.
Let's save the analytics and the X's and O's and stuff for a minute from now. It's been really strange for me because ostensibly this is the best Knick team. I mean, I'm 41, maybe not of my lifetime, but like if you look at maybe their ceiling, like there is no Michael Jordan in the league right now, or at least if there is, maybe. I don't know. We could talk about Nikola Jokic if you want later. But like 93, 94 was a very special year. 92, 93, if you want to go there too. Obviously, Jordan was out of league in 94. But like, this is like at the pinnacle as far as a Knicks fan around my age, or even a little bit older than me. And yet this season, I'm not going to speak for myself, but like interacting with a lot of Knicks fans, if I had one word to describe the overall feel that I get from Knicks fans watching this team, it is underwhelming. And I just want to know from you, as someone who covers the league and who has obviously covered the Knicks full time, for much of your career, what are your thoughts about that? Because I think it's a very complicated kind of question, and I just want to start there.
Yeah, it is very odd. And I mean, I would readily say that myself, a lot of the beat writers, I think just most people looking at it, it feels like we kind of know how this season ends. And that's a weird thing to say for a team that is like all year, you mentioned Jokic before, top 5 team, something that he said about them that I think just generally speaking, looking at the standings all year, you could say that. They obviously haven't played as well lately. They've been shorthanded lately, but there's something just obviously about the way they've lost a lot of these high profile games that just is really concerning. And it's not relevant to every team. Part of the reason Jokic has said that the Knicks are as good as they are is because they've beaten the hell out of the Nuggets twice. They have played well against the Rockets. They play well against certain teams in certain situations. They've made Milwaukee look terrible each time they played them. I think it's just when you go into Boston, knowing what Boston accomplished last year, and you have these kind of measuring stick games and you just come out of it just not looking like you even belong on the same stage. And Cleveland was similar the last time. Obviously, they had the closer game right at the start of the season with Cleveland, but that's what's weird about it. I think the other thing that's weird about it is that historically, when you look at the Knicks for the last 25 years, it's always been about the stars that they didn't have or the fact that they couldn't pair this player with this player. They have 2-star players now, so that's really not a relevant complaint to have. The question that could get kind of dicey here is like, for how well Cat has played this year offensively, I think he's been better than you could have asked for. Rebounding wise, better than you could have asked for. Passing wise, way better than you could have expected if you had not watched the guy play a ton before, which most people had not. And still feel like, wow, there's something missing here. And obviously it's the defensive portion. That is the part that becomes hard to wrap your mind around because, again, if you're a Knicks fan, you've kind of wanted this situation so badly for 2 guys that are not at the very end of their career, and that you didn't give up the farm for. And maybe individually they did not give up the farm for Cat, but it might have been the trade before that they did that with. And it's just, does it leave them kind of positioned in a spot where there's not enough upside with the rest of the team? And now we're obviously dealing with, injuries and last night, and all of a sudden you're down to your 4th point guard. And it's like, oh boy, this is a thin group that doesn't have that much room for error. And before it felt like they had some, to the point that they could still win a semifinal series, even with all the injuries they had last year. They could get themselves to a game 7 last year, despite all that. It doesn't feel like this group is quite, not necessarily that they're not wired that way, although I think that question is fair as well, but it just feels like it's a thinner group than they've had the last few years.
You just said 2 words that are very interesting to me. One was upside, and the other was what you just said, which is wired. And I think inevitably, every fan who has watched this season, in part because of it happened so recently, and in part because last year's team was so special. And I know, again, you know the Knicks organization as well as anybody out there. Like, you could feel it, that there was something special about that group, and there was maybe a tacit acceptance of the limited upside of last year's group. And even if you want to go the extra step and like say post Mikal trade, but pre-Cat trade, even then, if you're the biggest Knicks fan, if you like really were having an honest moment with yourself, like, yeah, we're probably a bridesmaid and not the bride, but
probably, yeah,
probably, but that's an interesting alternate universe, but I digress.
I understand it though.
Yeah, but then that just goes back to the other thing you said, which was how that team was wired, and really, it was even pre, like the year before, even like really from the moment they made the Josh Hart trade. It's like, oh, we know exactly what this team is. We know exactly what they are made of. We know what they're good at. We know what their maybe weak spots are. But like, if you turn on a Knicks game, it doesn't matter who they're playing. It doesn't matter if it's October or March or whatever. We know what we're going to get. And I think the combination of questions about upside and questions about, oh, what is our wiring now that we've made these moves and like, this is what we are. I think that is, for me at least, observing how people interact with the team and just like watching the team myself, I think those 2 things combined has made it the feel of the season that it is. And for me at this point, it's just a question of like, all right, how much of this do we write off because it's year one kind of this version of it, even though it's kind of been years in the making. So I'm going to ask you that question. How much of this do you are like, you're going to not give them a pass for this year, but like acknowledging it's year one?
The pass that I'm willing to give them is less important than the one that, you know, to some extent, like Leon, really.
Yeah.
Does someone get held accountable? And I think it really matters the way this season ends, right?
Yes.
They have looked totally uncompetitive against the very, very best teams in this league, which a lot of times that is something that you give someone a pass for. We obviously should mention Thibodeau just got an extension. We should mention, as you and I were both kind of alluding to, that the bench is very, very thin. It doesn't leave for a lot of trust necessarily, but probably more than what Thibodeau has given it as far as trust. I think last night was actually a very good example of like, okay, I've always known Knicks fans to be a little bit overly excited about the youngsters. I love Tyler Kolek. I've loved him in the preseason, but you know, like I've just watched too many guys that everybody's so excited about. And I always use this example of like comets and asteroids. And it's like, of course you get excited about those things. You never see them. Like it's like an endangered species watching young Knicks players up until recently. So I understand that thought process, but you know, and shout out to Tyler Kolek. We were there at his locker last night. And he's like, look, I've got to be better defensively. It's James Harden. Like he's the king of the old man game. That the whole point of that is to kind of trick guys who are faster and more athletic than you because they don't know the tricks. And so it was kind of a perfect storm last night, maybe. But you know, that's somewhere he needs to improve, and I'm sure Thibodeau knows that. It's probably why he doesn't play him extensively. So there are those things to nitpick, obviously, but there's also so many games and times where the guys don't need to be playing the minutes they do. And so you do wonder, like when you see media things bubbling up from the standpoint of players venting about things, or Mikal Bridges venting about things. Mikal Bridges venting about playing games and playing minutes is an odd thing. But I think that there's reason sometimes for that to come up when we're watching him play the first 47 minutes of a game they win by 25 points. There's all sorts of things that you can get into from that standpoint. And the bottom line, I would say, is that I don't think the accountability is going to come down on a player's head this year of whether or not there's this feeling of should more have happened, should the team have accomplished more. Cat isn't going anywhere, and I don't think anybody thinks he's going anywhere, by the way. Mikal Bridges has more or less, like, statistically been fine, but just watching it, there's games that really leave you wanting more from him. There's other games where he's spectacular. He wins you the game. He has a game-sealing block, not once, but twice over the course of the season. Like, his impact is there, but it tends to be against teams that are not as great. And I think it's okay to say that statistically, just looking at it.
I mean, the numbers are what they are.
Yeah, and but I mean, the number that is just so glaring to me still is that you didn't give up a ton for Towns in terms of picks and stuff like that. I think the DiVincenzo portion of that trade was massive, and we knew it would be. But the picks that you gave up to get Bridges really stand out here, and I know for a fact if the Knicks had a redo there, they would not give up that many picks for what this season has been. So it's hard to judge it because there are no takebacks with that. You don't want to make a bigger mistake by giving him up for too little to try to get out of this hole and to try to get more depth. I think you have to run this group back a little bit, but I also don't. If that's done, I wonder whether Thibodeau comes back. And I wonder to what extent do they need to make a run in the playoffs or to at least be competitive against a Boston in the second round to justify that move? Or will Leon have so much patience in saying, like, man, I really kind of gave you too short of a rotation here based on what we had to give that up, what we had to give up to get Cat, to get Bridges. Did that happen too late in the game from a training camp standpoint for that to be a fully fair situation for Thibodeau? I'm not sure, but it feels like something feels like it has to give, but I'm not sure which aspect of that changes or what level of accountability is held here. So,
man, you always give me so much to chew on.
Sorry. A lot.
No, I love it because this is like you in the last 3 minutes, you distilled this entire season down to that soundbite as only you can. The roster, the lack of roster depth, I think, I mean, we said it last summer, like based, we don't need to get into apron stuff, but like we knew there was a level of constraint there that was probably not even going to be able to be solved. And sure enough, it was not solved before this transaction cycle. It was probably going to take an additional transaction cycle to clear yourself of like the apron constriction and everything. So like, I think I've personally been willing to give a pass there as far as this front office. Like they should get another summer after the moves that they made this past summer. But the issue, and this gets into everything you just mentioned, is I think it's twofold, which is that, and this is kind of both of these, I think you could go up the Thibodeau tree for each of these. They're like, the starting five has just not worked as well as it needs to.
Absolutely.
And you could say, well, they could bring someone in who maybe makes it fit better or whatnot. But like, Deuce McBride is here. Now, Deuce McBride is not a perfect player. Deuce McBride is like, we always are fond of saying he's a wing in a point guard's body, but again, you have a coach that values what he values. He values size. He was resistant to playing Emmanuel quickly with Jalen Brunson, and he's been almost as resistant to playing, if not more resistant to playing Deuce McBride with Jalen Brunson. So obviously, if Brunson's going to be playing 40 minutes a game, like there's a limitation there. But like Deuce could shoot it. Josh Hart is the guy that everybody wants to see maybe out of the starting lineup in favor of a little bit more, or even maybe not out of the starting lineup, but just the minutes distribution, maybe be a little bit more even there, get some more shooting in there, maybe. And the McBride lineups, I don't have to tell you, the numbers are gangbusters when you put him in.
Always have been.
Exactly. And he's that sort of player. He has that kind of quickly effect. But then you go to the Bridges part of it, and it's like, those comments they knocked me over. Not in what he was saying, but the fact that he said them at all. And that to me says, again, you mentioned Tibbs and like, where is the accountability going to fall? Like, I don't know whether there's going to be a trade this summer where you can swap out Bridges to get, I don't even want to, we don't have to do fake trades here, but like to get 65 or 70 cents on the dollar. What does that even look like given that you gave up all of those picks? I don't know. Is that trade going to be there? I don't know. But to your point, it's not going to be easy trade to find. So if there is something in the water here that is now putting this very specific culture that you have built over the last few years at risk, well, then we all know what the easiest way out of it is going to be, because it's the same decision that every NBA team makes. It's get a new coach. But then you go back to Tibbs and how steeped he is, not only with Leon, but with Brunson. Like, I'm just going to throw it back to you. Like, let's say it doesn't end well against Boston. Let's say they lose in 5, not terribly competitive, or, several of the games are not competitive. Like, where do you see this going?
Yeah, I mean, I had this conversation with James Edwards, him, Christian, Winfield, where it's all the things are way more tangled than with most teams. Jalen Brunson has known Tom Thibodeau his whole life. So it's not just like an easy call there. Perhaps the easiest call is just to run it back to give everybody one more year of this, because it wasn't perfect, because it came together really late in training camp, because you really didn't have a Mitchell Robinson level rim protector that you could even try next to Cat during the regular season, which that was always the question mark here with Cat was, okay, Minnesota felt very strongly that the only way they could make this work was to give up their farm to go get a defensive player of the year caliber rim protector to place next to this guy so he doesn't have to do what the Knicks are now asking him to do. So it was always a fair question as to whether the Knicks defense was going to take not just a step back, but a substantial step back from that standpoint. So maybe to give it more time to see if it can work, to see if you can kind of retool the type of center that you have next to him. If it's not Mitch, obviously he's going to be a free agent.
In not this summer, next summer he'll be a free agent.
Oh wow. So forgive me. I'm sitting here blanking.
Okay. No. Listen, man, I forget who's under what contract sometimes.
It's my job to remember it, so that's bad that I'm forgetting. But I say all that to say that there's a lot to be figured out. Absolutely, Thibodeau could be part of that. Anybody would be within their right mind to say there just hasn't been enough flexibility from certain standpoints to justify keeping him on, that we kind of know what we're getting. And also the way that his stories have ended with other teams, that there needs to be more flexibility with certain things. And I think there has been in some ways. But I think that generally is the easy way out for most teams, particularly when you've got high-priced guys. But I also could understand the idea of Mikal, the idea that, like, if you're going to extend him, what does that look like? And what sort of money are you talking about for that? For someone that, I don't want to be that psychoanalyst, but, like, we all kind of sense when we're in the locker room with him. Maybe.
No, seriously, how do you analyze his season without doing a little bit of that? Because this, watching him, yeah.
The comments were one thing. I mean, you guys see the interviews that Alan Hahn does on the court where he's giving, like, sometimes 4-word, 5-word responses to questions that are 10-second, 15-second questions. And it's gotten to a point where, like, sometimes it's like, okay, I'm going to the locker room to figure out who to interview. And I don't dislike Mikal. Like, I appreciate him. Like, he's been one of my favorite players in the league for years, dating back to when he was first in the league. Like, even before I watched the guy play an NBA game, I was kind of just a fan of him because I kind of felt awful about the way that it looked like he was going to play for his hometown team and then actually goes to Phoenix. But that's aside from that, just like I like guys that try to go out there and play every night, which he's done his whole career, that kind of are, you know, good at the defensive side before they're really good on the offensive side. And he's put it together from both ends. I like him. But it's kind of like, well, what am I even going to get if I ask him questions? Like, if it's going to be kind of just an abrupt, awkward, I don't really want to talk to you sort of vibe that you're getting.
Is that the vibe you're getting?
That's putting it too harshly, but, like, when you watch a team, someone that is affiliated with the team interview him and he doesn't get any more of a response to him from that on the court in front of the whole crowd, like, I don't know what to make of it. Just doesn't seem, again, this is where I'm saying, like, I'm not going to try to psychoanalyze him, but, like,
I understand.
It doesn't seem like the warmest sort of situation, but it also, it's a different situation than he's been in, where he's a real focal point. I don't know that there was a way around that, given what the Knicks gave up to get him. And that wasn't his decision, what the Knicks gave up to get him.
No,
but
it was not.
We have to see. Like, I think with all of this, the Knicks have a lot of big decisions to make. And I'm not sure it's an easy call, like exactly what route they take. Maybe the easiest is just to bring everybody back. But I think that that's a harder proposition when you're talking about, if you're talking about a scenario where they are out in 4 or 5 in the second round. If we're talking about a scenario where they don't get to the second round, I think something probably has to be done at that point, even if it is because of injuries. So we'll see, but it's a tough spot, and it's such a weird conversation to be having about a team that is going to be right around 50 wins again, probably, because this is something that fans your age, my age, would dream of. You know, anything post 2000s that, you know, is rare and has not been a bad season, but it also has not been nearly as good a season as the record would suggest, just given that they have not been able to touch these elite teams this year.
Chris, I started doing post games in the 17-18 season after the All-Star break that year, where I think
Porzingis' rookie year.
Wait, no. So that was
that was 14-15. What am I talking about?
No, so 17-18 was the year that KP got injured. So they finished out
was that Hornacek coaching?
Well, they hired Fizdale in the summer of 2018. So yeah, that must have been the end of Hornacek. Yeah.
Okay.
And I remember they won their first game out of the All-Star break. It was against the Orlando Magic, and I think they won like 3 or 4 games the rest of the way. And you know, you're watching these games, and you're like, what one thing? Like, oh, Frank Ntilikina made a nice pass in the second half. You know, he dribbled and didn't fall down and hit the guy in the corner, and maybe he took a shot at them. So, like, it sounds ridiculous.
It's so unfair. It's you have to feel like it's so unfair. Like, if you're Leon Rose, if you're Tom Thibodeau, to bring some stability, not some stability, to bring stability, to
Hold
be.
on. I know a guy who wrote this book about this
Oh
team.
man.
And there's the guy, Pat Riley, in the center of that picture.
Yeah.
And Tom Thibodeau's about to pass him in wins for the franchise.
Which is nuts. Which is nuts.
Crazy. And we're sitting here. Look, I'm a big Tibbs fan. I don't know if you know that. I genuinely I have like a real affection for the guy because he just puts his head down and he comes to work every day and he's like, what can I do to give ourselves the best chance to win? And I love that about him, but I also acknowledge the things that you are saying. Many fans have said and criticizing him, but at the same time, it like you look at what he's accomplished and what Leon has accomplished, and the fact that we're sitting here having these conversations. But and as I'm going to throw it back to you, like having covered the league as long as you have, knowing that locker room dynamics are or can be such fickle things. Like you wrote about it with the 90s Knicks, obviously, and how like one of my favorite chapters in the book is the Don Nelson era and how like,
oh boy.
I mean, you want to talk about things that went sideways.
Yeah.
No, but to their credit, they figured that out one way or another after 50 whatever games it was. And they hired a pretty good coach to replace him. But like, it feels like just the Knicks culture that they've built up over the years is so specific in what it is. And like, if you're Mikal Bridges and you're coming in here and like, what if this is just not for him? Like, again, what are you supposed to do in that situation?
Yeah, I don't know. And I want to be really clear that like we see these guys for minutes at a time on game days, on practice days. It's not enough to know definitively, but those comments were, I mean, to your point, like they kind of shook the core a little bit. I was not on that road trip. But I got a text from my bosses like, you see this comment? Like, kind of like, do we need to have our antennas up? Like, is there any more that we need to be doing, that we can be doing to figure out what this is about? And there's something to be said for the fact that like minutes are something that we talk about, that fans talk about, that the players might talk about, but generally speaking, when it comes to Tom Thibodeau, the same way that he's always said we have enough, Josh Hart has generally said, like, I can handle the minutes. Jalen Brunson has more or less suggested, I can handle the minutes. That was different, just one, because Mikal Bridges, even though he has a tight relationship with those guys, is an outsider with regards to this group. He's still new to this group. And for whatever reason, like, it has been kind of just an up-down season. It's been a season where he's had to adjust not just to the minutes. He's played big minutes before, but it's the role. And I've written about that a few times this season, about the fact that like he has not been used solely as a point of attack defender ever before. And that's different. And it's also different and probably somewhat frustrating to have to take a little bit of the fall for the fact that Towns scores so much and has such flashy passes that to the average viewer, they're like, man, Towns has been great this year. You look at MVP ladders that, I don't know how much effort is always put into those.
There's my slam cover right behind me with Towns on it.
Yeah, I mean, he's on slam covers. Like, to the average person, Towns has been fantastic. He's an MVP candidate. Now, no, he's not really. But, but that's because, like, we're watching the game and we're looking at the numbers and we're seeing the way teams are attacking him. And Bridges is part of that. He's the top of that. But Bridges might be doing enough of his job, and then the end part of his job is actually something that falls to Towns, and he doesn't do the job well enough, and then it reflects poorly on Bridges. That's difficult, and I think it takes a certain level of understanding and just ball watching to know that is something that could be very frustrating for someone in his position, and just that the vibes are not as great as they were last year. That so naturally the new pieces are going to be looked at, and Towns has played better statistically and looked the part to a lot of people more than Bridges has, based on what they were expecting, based on what was given up in the trade. So from that standpoint, those comments were just, and even talking to the reporters that were on that trip, those comments were just, they stood out in a big way that normally this team can at times kind of be boring, just from the standpoint of like, Josh Hart has his humorous quotes here and there. But aside from that, it's like, okay, we kind of know what the players are going to say about the minutes. We know what Tibbs is going to say about the minutes. the team is playing well, so there's not anything to really knock aside from these bad losses they've taken in big games. But, more or less, like, stuff is steady. That was not a steady comment. That was like, oh, wow, no one's ever said that before. And because no one's ever said it, and a key player just said it, is this a sign of other people feeling this, or is this a sign of them kind of pushing Mikal to the forefront because he's new that he says it, and that's something that other people are feeling more deeply? And I don't think we definitively know the answer to that, but it was just interesting. That's all. It was very, very interesting, and we'll obviously see how things play out the rest of the year.
Hey guys, quick word to tell you about our friends from MANDO. What is MANDO? Well, I'll tell you. It is a whole body deodorant that is safe to use anywhere on your body. Yes, there is a part of your personage that may smell. MANDO is to the rescue. It was created by a doctor who saw firsthand how normal BO, we all know about BO, was being misdiagnosed and mistreated. So here's the deal. MANDO, does it have a normal deodorant stick that you've been using your whole life on your underarms? Absolutely it does. And it's great. But that's not all that they have, because your BO and your odor does not just come from under your armpits. It comes from all over the place. So if you want a little spray for yourself, MANDO has that. If you want a little invisible cream, MANDO's Pro Sport, it has that. If you want some body wash for your different odor issues, MANDO has that. And best of all, they have these invisible wipes. These are my favorite ones. You pop them open, you grab a wipe. If you know you've been sweating from a particular place, wipe it off a little bit, and you're good to go. MANDO truly has figured out something that it has taken way, way, way too long to figure out for us men. We are busy, we are sweaty, we are smelly, and we must control that odor. MANDO's starter pack, it really is perfect for new customers. It comes with all the things that I just showed you, plus free shipping. And as a special offer for Knicks Film School listeners, new customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to 40% off your starter pack. Just use code KFS at shopmando.com. Again, it's 40% off a starter pack by using code KFS at shopmando.com. Please support our show. Tell them we sent you. Smell fresher, stay drier, and boost your confidence from head to toe with MANDO. Someone who will hopefully see on the court to help them as those things play out is Jalen Brunson. It seems like a good time to transition to him. I've taken to saying over the last few weeks, especially when he hasn't played, that like these few weeks, if anything, have solidified for me that he is, I don't know, the most important person to one franchise in the league right now. Look, he's not Jokic, obviously. Wemby, obviously, their whole franchise is going to be built around him. But like, when you look at what he does on the court, and then when you, I think, look at what he means and like holding everything together with the locker room, I think he's in that conversation. And I want to try to spin this towards a positive, because we've been a little negative. My fault, because I'm steering us down this road. This is not your fault. That's
okay. It's the reality of where stuff has been.
It is the reality of where stuff has been, which again speaks to how we open the show. It's like this is what the conversation has been this year. I will continue to have hope as a fan who would like to see this team win a championship at some point before I move on. That could happen. And Jalen Brunson is my reason for thinking that happened. And that thinking that could happen. Maybe that's naive, but there is something about him and the way he goes about his business that, like, is it unfair to, like, all of this stuff that we've been talking about? Is it unfair to put that all on him and, like, hey, make it work between your old college teammate and your coach who, like, they maybe don't see eye to eye? And not only off the court, make it work on the court too. And, like, again, it's not fair. But if there's a guy I've ever watched in my life as a sports fan who I'm like, yeah, you know what, maybe he can, it's Jalen Brunson. How crazy is that to you?
It's a lot of pressure to put on someone. I mean, he is a captain, but he's not a GM. He's not. And again, I think some of these dynamics are tough, because I think that was actually the question. Like, when my editor sat me down and said, like, what feature ideas do you have? I was like, the first one I have is Bridges. And I went back and calculated it with statisticians as best I could. I don't think anyone in league history has ever been traded for more first round picks without having been an all-star. And that's just like, I think that frames the way a lot of people think about player value. And, you know, and certainly there have been other things that have kind of come into play the last few years with unprotected versus, you know, light protections on picks and stuff like that. But that, considering how long the Knicks held on to their picks as well, this was kind of where they decided to spend it. And, you know, and there's other ways to give up significant value in a trade too. The Knicks obviously decided not to pay quickly and to move him and to move RJ for OG. That was kind of like a home run in a lot of people's eyes because they didn't have to give up picks to do it. So it just depends on how you value picks versus, you know, if we can give up players that we don't really want to keep anyway. It's how you view it. But I felt like from that point, just like that's significant what they're giving up. They had not been willing to touch this stash of picks for really anybody else, maybe Donovan Mitchell to some extent, but even that, obviously, they were not willing to meet an asking price from that standpoint. So from that standpoint, this is really significant that you gave up this much for this guy. And you were kind of betting on the idea of, okay, he didn't really cut it, wasn't really the guy in Brooklyn. Like he wasn't a guy that you could just build the whole franchise around in Brooklyn. What if we ask him to go back to more of a role of what he had in Phoenix? And this is closer to that. But again, they're still asking him to do something different. And let's be honest, and this is where I circle back to your specific question. The reason he's being asked to do something different is so that teams don't attack Jalen the way that they otherwise would if he were the point of attack defender. So that would probably be like the number one way. And and to be fair to Jalen, he possesses the ball more than anybody else in the league per game. He's asked to do so much on offense, and that doesn't even get to what he does in the clutch. So it would be too much to ask him to do both and to do them both at a really, really high level. It's hard. So from that standpoint, Bridges is tasked with doing something that he's not used to doing in that sort of way. I think the best thing that Brunson can really do in a situation like that is basically say, hey, man, like, keep these things in-house. Now it's out there. That's the thing that Jalen excels at, is basically having a poker face on. I'm sure he has feelings about how many minutes he plays. I'm sure they all do, particularly when they're up by 25 on the Hornets at home, when they don't even have LaMelo out there or Miles Bridges. I'm sure they have feelings on that. But he doesn't, like, he never steps out of line with what he says. And so I would be curious to know the way those guys felt about that, whether maybe there was a conversation had about something like that. That's probably the extent to which I think he can say something. But other than that, I don't know what a captain can really do there with that. It's, it's I don't know. Like, I think Jalen could be the reason they win a championship. Like, they probably will be the reason they win a championship if they do at some point. Like, he's their best player. But I don't know, aside from pulling player aside and saying, hey, that's not how we do things here. That is one of the things that when you talk about a culture shift, Jalen has set that culture and kind of embodied it. And generally speaking, you haven't had guys really step outside of saying certain things the last couple of years. And that is a big part of it, I think.
Yeah, I think the tough part to asking, like, what more can Jalen do? The reason part of that is difficult is, and I'll be more specific to the defensive end. I also think it's a question of what more is he capable of doing, because we know he cares. Like, we know he is willing.
Absolutely.
Like, that's not a question, but he
gives up his body with the charges consistently. Like, I think he's doing what he can do. Kyle Lowry always told me, he's like, this is what I can do. Like, I can be a good help defender because I know I can't, like, just look at me. Like, I can't block people's shot at the rim. It's understood.
Yeah. But at the same time, there are like real physical limitations there. And I don't want to get into like, preferred first round opponents and whatnot. But like, man, if they do play the Pistons, like, we know every time Detroit has the ball and Cade's on the floor, it's like, okay, whoever Jalen's guarding, it's like, come on in and let's have some fun. And like, that has been a difficult thing for him, to deal with this year. Cat is a more interesting question because like he was a member of the best defense in the league a year ago. So like we know it can work, and there's other schematic things that, like, again, it's the Mavericks or the corpse of the Mavericks. So like take it with several grains of salt, but like they switched up their defensive scheme at halftime, and it was night and day. And you had Cat like switching. He's at the level. He's doing all these different things. So it's like, you could see there being a world where like Cat could work with Brunson. It's a more difficult conversation. Let's. I'm not taking up your whole day, although God knows I could.
Go ahead.
Let's start to finish up. I have already begun to, because I am steeped in negativity, having watched this team for so many years, already thinking about like off-season vibes and what like I thinking back to what was the Portland team where I think they got swept, and it was like, and Stotts actually survived it. It was maybe, I don't know.
I don't remember, but I was blown away some of the times that they just kept everything completely intact. And I remember writing about it at one point that they had Nurkic, CJ, and Dame. The only other trios that played as many seasons together as those guys did were all teams that won basically like multiple championships, with the exception of like, I think Malone and Stockton and Hornacek or something. Like, it was just weird that they didn't, like basically it was kind of unprecedented for the most part that core stuck together. And then obviously with the same coach as well for a long time of that.
So like, I think like in general, if you're an NBA team and you could avoid having a summer where, as the season ends and the summer begins, you have many people around the NBA saying like, boy, oh boy, this summer's really going to test their culture. I think all things being equal, you want to avoid those
a little
things.
A little,
Mm-hmm. For as much as I'm sure there are Knicks fans who are like, no, let's have that summer because then we'll get a new coach. Again, I'm not amongst them, not now at least. So like, I'm just going to ask you, what does an okay end to the season look like for you, Chris Herring, for this Knicks team?
I think, the dream scenario is that you get through the second round somehow. And let's see. It's weird. I think also last night was interesting because all of a sudden, between the point guard situation with all the injuries and just what is it, 7 of 12 they've lost now?
It sounds about right.
It would take a lot for the Pacers to climb above the Knicks, but had they beaten the Lakers last night, and depending on how much longer it is until Jalen comes back, if Cam and Deuce are still going to miss more time, it sounds like Deuce should be back relatively soon based on what they've been saying. But crazier things have happened, and if that happened, where does it put the Knicks? Does it position them slightly differently to play the Cavs as opposed to the Celtics? To me, just watching the games lately, I know that they just got absolutely shellacked by the Cavs the last time as well. But I still think there's been something about the way the Celtics have just beaten them consistently each time that does not seem like it bodes well for that matchup in the second round.
It's easy.
It looks that way.
I know the Knicks made it like they went on a run in the third quarter of the last time they played each other, and that was fun.
It's good at the 4, yeah.
Yeah, but like, I don't get the sense that this Boston team is breaking a sweat in these games.
I don't either, and that's just not a comforting feeling if you're the Knicks. So from that standpoint, like, are there ways in which they could? Also, we've watched a couple times the last few years now that crazier things have happened. Whether it is obviously the Pacers making their way to the conference finals last year, the Hawks from a few years ago making it to the conference finals, and kind of some good fortune and some luck that kind of happens that way. They could get there. It would be really, really unexpected, and it would probably take something else happening that, you don't wish injury or anything upon anybody.
Mitchell with the groin right now that's a thing.
Yeah, so there's stuff that could happen that all of a sudden just changes the landscape of it. But that would be, if that happens, or even if you take a series to 6-7 games where they're hard fought games, the Knicks are not favored in either one of those series. That's nothing to be ashamed of. And then you can actually take the scenario we've been talking about all year, which is that this was a new group. This was a new group that was put together pretty late in the offseason that did not have the depth that it fundamentally needed to win a championship. That, you can take that into next season and say, okay, Tibbs, we want you to think about the roster this way next year. We're giving you more depth to play with. And because of that, you can't be running guys out there the way you are. Or that we hope that you wouldn't do that, because you've actually got vets now that you can trust, that you can play on the wing, that, that maybe you take a longer look at Deuce as part of your starting lineup, and that you bring Josh in as part of your second unit next year, that you do different things that kind of mitigate some of the stuff that that you're fundamentally asking Mikal to do defensively, that you mitigate Jalen in the way that a team like Detroit can take advantage of him defensively. And also that you give Jalen a little bit less ball handling responsibility so that his offensive minutes are a little bit easier than what they are. I know that, that's not what Deuce excels at. We know he's a great shooter. We know he's a great on-ball defender, and that he's still coming along from the standpoint of trying to really make plays offensively, but it's still somebody else out there that you can put out there. So it's not just Jalen having to create all the time.
But I think that's what I'm going to cut you off. But like some of the games since Jalen has gone out, now look, there are periods of really serious offensive stagnation without Jalen Brunson. But there are also periods where you're watching this team, like the first quarter last night. Again, I know the Clippers were easing into that game, but it's like, man, the fact that they're able to do this, like everybody's moving, like these are really talented basketball players. They don't have a traditional lead initiator without Brunson, but there's a world here where you could see exactly what you're talking about, you know?
Absolutely.
And like, and how do we get to that world? And I think that's one of the big questions. And again, a lot of people are going to say it. Can they get to that world under this coach? Obviously they can, because they're doing it under the coach. But you also know that like when Brunson's back, what that's probably going to look like. Like,
Yeah. And I think it's just a trust thing. I mean, the minute stuff, the fact that Jalen is always going to be the guy with the shot at the end. Also, he's excelled at it. Like he's been fantastic in the clutch. There's no question about that. But it's what gives me the best odds and what gives me the least variance. And it's been interesting that with this group, even seeing what we've seen with the defensive struggles, that this is the group he is going to roll with repeatedly, even when it doesn't look the way we're used to it looking with the Thibodeau team. And I think that was easily one of my biggest questions coming into this season. I didn't necessarily know exactly what it would look like, but it was like, it just feels like the identity has to shift. And there have been so many games, and I wrote this in the last big feature I did on the team
on Cat
recently on Cat, but then also just about why they can't hang with the most elite teams in the league. And it does feel like there are so many games where they've kind of played with fire a little bit, where whether it's the 6-point lead they've got with 10 seconds left against the Hawks, or it's a game against the Pistons where they did get burned and they lost, where it's just when you're in these shootouts, you can't really just turn it on, turn it off defensively, but it actually doesn't look like they're trying to turn it on, turn it off. It's just like sometimes they just are deficient defensively in a way that we were not used to seeing previous Thibodeau teams look like. And so that will be interesting to watch. I think the scariest stat I've seen all season around this team is being 29th in the league defensively when they're playing against top 10 offenses. And that is something where the scheme stuff has to change. Certainly if they get the Celtics in the second round, they've gotten more open looks against the Knicks than any other team. The Knicks have played more drop against them than any other team the Celtics have played this season, and screen and rolls. And it's just kind of like, why would you play them that way? And maybe an area where Mitch can make an impact. I don't know that I'm expecting him to produce a 20-point swing, but you've got to try something different. Some of that is scheme. Some of that you would hope is personnel with Mitch being back. But we'll see. I mean, crazier things have happened, but it just does. And I know it's pessimistic, but they haven't given that much reason to suggest that they're going to make it happen in the second round and beyond.
And some of it is just like you're hoping. Again, this is like I don't know if this is reasonable of me to expect, but like like a guy like Josh Hart, who has really been underwhelming defensively all year, and part of me just wonders, like, is he just saving it? Is he holding it back? And like like we've seen him when the games really matter, like come up big. Is that in the offing? We've seen OG started to really turn it on defensively over the last few weeks. Perhaps not coincidentally after he was off with an injury, recovering from injury for a few weeks. So, look, I
actually think that's the best case scenario to some extent too. I'm sorry, I know I cut you off.
No, absolutely.
But for guys to come back from these injuries and to be a little bit more spry would be an amazing development. Just because I was looking at it, and I'll probably include it in my story coming up a few days from now. Like Bridges and Hart, and it's one thing to look at minutes, and I think that's fair to look at, obviously, and because they're playing almost every game, obviously their total minutes are going to be higher. Look at how many more miles those guys have run statistically. Like I was just looking at it out of curiosity, like how many more miles has Mikal Bridges run than like the Bucks wings, for instance? And when you take that into playoff series, he's like run more I think he's up to 80 miles more than any other player on the Bucks team. Just for the season. And it's like, again, I know he's played every game. I know he's played more minutes than everybody. So there's more opportunity, but it's like, that's very real mileage when you're asking. And I know that, days of rest, but it's like, that is very real mileage. And he's not the only guy that has played more minutes. Like everybody across the board, even with their injuries, has played more minutes than most guys around the league have missed games. And so when OG misses games, okay, other guys that they're playing against have too. It's just it's a lot to ask of these guys, and that's always my question about Tibbs coach teams. And what I'm curious about now is like, is there another level to get to? And I feel like that one playoff series where they played the Cavs in round one, it looked like that. But even looking back on that, they were clearly the better team. They clearly punched the Cavs in the mouth. They clearly had another layer of effort compared to the Cavs, but the Cavs didn't know what to expect from a playoff setting. And so if you are hunting a certain playoff matchup, I've heard the chatter. I see the stuff online about some people feeling like, let's take the Pistons. Other people saying, we haven't looked great against the Pistons. And to your point about matchups and stuff like that, there are some that you would not want to touch. If you're hoping for the Pistons, the reason you're doing it is because maybe they're caught off guard on some level by the physicality. But that is, in a lot of ways, a veteran team. Cade has not made the playoffs before, but like a lot of the other guys on that team have been in the playoffs. Tim Hardaway Jr. has been in the playoffs. Tobias Harris has been in the playoffs. Malik Beasley. That's not like a young team. At best, if you're a Knicks fan, maybe you're saying that we like our chances against JB Bickerstaff, and that maybe is a different conversation, but it's not like a team that doesn't know what it's doing. And just looking at the games this season, like it's, if the Bucks don't have Dame and the way you've looked against the Bucks this year, like that, I'm not going to say that's the matchup you want maybe, but like take your chances against Giannis. Obviously it's not something that people would love to do, but I don't know that the Pistons are just a team that you like. I don't know that you could feel great about anything. Like the Knicks have so much mileage on their legs, and I don't know that it provides enough of if there's enough of like a turbo left in the tank based on the way that they run their guys out every night. So we'll
Chris,
see.
if they don't play better than they've been playing, it started before Jalen went out. That's the thing, Mm-hmm. And if they don't play better, like it doesn't matter who they're going to play. It really is not going to matter, because they just have not played up to their capability. And if they don't do that, then look, it's weird to say this feels like the most consequential postseason in since the era that you wrote about in Blood in the Garden. So it's coming. We're 10 games away. It should be interesting. I
think they're going to find it rhythm wise somehow. Like at some point, I don't know if it'll be the playoffs or it'll be like the last week of the season when everybody else is like, man, we stopped playing. It's not a big deal. Like the Knicks, that was kind of what happened last year, where the Knicks played their tail off and just played as hard as they could in the last game of the year. And, they were playing for something. They wanted to win. They wanted the 2 seed. And on some level, maybe they go in more prepared. They're not afraid of Philly. They take it to them. They win that series. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe that is a galvanizing force for this team. But again, that was how last year's team was really wired. And I'm really curious to see when the cards are on the table, what does this team look like? What do they have in the tank? What do they come out with? And it'll be fascinating to watch.
You're not the only one.
We'll all get to see it together.
Yeah, we will. Quick break to tell you about our friends from HUEL, specifically the HUEL Black Edition ready-to-drink meal in a bottle. What is HUEL? Well, I'm excited to tell you about it, and I'm excited to show you. But first, a quick reminder that if you want to get in on HUEL, new customers can visit HUEL.com/KFS today and use my code KFS to get 15% off your first order plus a free gift. So again, what is HUEL? It is a meal in a bottle. It is super convenient. It is very easy for anybody who has a busy life like me doing a bunch of podcasts. What do I need? I need a bottle that I could throw in my bag, take with me on the go, pop open, and boom. There is my meal in a bottle right here. It comes in some great flavors: iced coffee, that's my wife's favorite, chocolate and banana, vanilla, or the one I am partial to, chocolate. I am a big fan of a good old chocolate milkshake, but chocolate milkshakes aren't great for me. HUEL, however, really is delicious. It's something I could feel good about drinking. And again, it is super easy and convenient. Tons of benefits, high in protein, vitamin C. It's cheaper than a cup of coffee, and it tastes really good. Again, if you want to get in on the action with Black Edition ready-to-drink meals in a bottle, just go to HUEL.com/KFS today and use my code KFS to get 15% off that first order plus a free gift. All right. I see Andrew was popped up on the bottom of the screen. Andrew, did you want to come up for any reason, or?
I literally just turned my camera on. That's all. But hi, Chris. Good to see you.
Hey, man.
I'm gonna wear podcaster.
You guys are talking for too long.
Clearly, he did pick. I mean, Chris, it's good to see you.
You too, buddy.
How is your? I don't know. I literally had nothing, so he caught me off guard. How's married life? Let's go there. Congratulations on behalf of the Knicks Film School audience, by the way.
Thank you so much. Married life has been fantastic. I'm becoming that curmudgeon that the Knicks games is as big a blessing as it is to be at the games, and I'm at most of them at this point. That kind of looks at my watch, and I'm like, man, I want this game to go faster. When we have Tracy Morgan, God bless him. Like, I hope everything is good with him now at this point. But like, when we get 10-minute, 15-minute delays on the court, I'm like, man, I just want to get home to my wife. And I can't think of a more beautiful feeling to be. And obviously, you're relatively new to it. Not as new to it as I am, but I think that's a beautiful thing, and it makes me really happy. So I appreciate you asking. Thank you.
I speak on behalf of me and John and our significant others that we do the same exercise somewhere around the fourth quarter of these watch parties where I don't know if you know this, but obviously, we do these watch parties at T-Squared Social in the city. We went through a bit of a losing streak. The Knicks just got lost every single watch party that we went to for 7 consecutive watch parties.
That's gotta be like a worse version of like having a really bomb jersey that you just don't want to wear anymore. Like, like a special jersey. And it's like, oh man, like we keep losing. It's not fun, but it's like the atmosphere is fun, but the result is not fun. It starts making you wonder a little bit.
It was one of those things where like the first couple, they lost the first two of the losing streak were the Thunder back-to-back, and then Cat didn't play in the game against the Timberwolves. So it was like, okay, like you didn't beat a team that's lost 10 times all year. I'm not going to get too upset.
Right.
Then the next one, they were riding high. They had just beaten Memphis by like 100, and then they beat Jokic on this Nuggets team that was coming in on like a 5 or 6 game winning streak.
They took that really bad loss. Which game was that? I'm trying to remember.
It was a very famous day because it was a Saturday against the Lakers.
Oh, that's right.
I was like, no Anthony Davis, and we're thinking, the big story will be the Knicks getting their fifth or whatever straight win against the Lakers. LeBron was great. The Knicks didn't play well, and then the Lakers traded for Luka after the game. So
that was so wild. I was sitting there talking to Rich Paul 2 feet from Savannah. Bronny came out to hang out with his mom, and then LeBron came out, and I was like, Rich, I'm going to let you go. And walked off, and no more than 45 minutes later, I had gotten off the train and walking back to my apartment, and I see people blowing up Blue Sky. It was weird. It's so weird being on Blue Sky when breaking news happens because it's like it's even harder to verify whether this shit is real because you have like the shadow shams on Blue Sky.
Yes, the shadow shams.
So I see people complaining. They're like, "Yo, I can't believe this happened before Jimmy," and I'm like, "Okay, so it wasn't Jimmy Butler that got traded. So who got traded?" And I keep seeing Luka's name, and I'm like, why are people talking about Luka? Because surely the Mavs didn't trade him. And then you see it, and I'm like, wait, this can't be real. And then that was like the first time I'd logged back onto Twitter in a solid 2 months at least. And Shams is like, no, this is real. And I'm like, wow. And I couldn't help but think, just like selfishly, what if this had happened like a little bit later and I'd still been right there around LeBron and his family? just to see the reaction in real time of what had happened with that. Like, I rarely, and it was crazy because he wasn't in the locker room, so it would have been fair game to just pull out my phone and be like, to just pan over to him and his family, because we were just in the tunnel of the Garden at that point. But it was crazy. That's still, I'll remember that one for a long time because that was nuts. Like, and it's funny because I remember when the Porzingis trade happened to trade him to the Mavs, it was similar where it was right after the Knicks had that game against the Mavs, maybe not right after, but it was like right after the Mavs had been there. And it's like, I wonder what business was happening right then and there when, to prompt that to go down or to kind of ease that along. And obviously the Lakers were up to something during that game. They had to have been to make that happen, but absolutely nuts. We
were recording live and we were on air, and there's a funny clip of like with Benji Riddles, and he's saying something about the Knicks, and I'm just looking at my phone with a confused look, and like what other look are you supposed to have, bro? Like, yeah. And then he Andrew sees me, and he's like, and Andrew's like,
that's the thing. So just to give the mechanics, and this from living in New York City, like if you have a train to catch, you need to catch that train if it's Long Island
Benji
Railroad.
Had to catch a train.
Like,
that's right.
Benji had to catch a train. And it was like, you have 7 minutes. I got to get these guys off the air. We decided to do a remote from T Squared, like to use the venue. And it happened to have worked out perfectly that we were recording at the time to catch this moment. But I'm signing them off, and I'm like, all right, sign off. And John he froze. He's looking at his phone. And to this day, it's my favorite part of the video. I'll send it to you later. I don't think we'll ever see that again. John's staring at his phone, and he's like,
no. And then he asks, and then I'm looking at the tweet from Shams, and Andrew's like, what is it? I'm like, nothing. It's a joke. And as I'm saying it, I'm like, but what's the joke?
But what's the joke? I don't get it. What's the point?
Like, if you're a Mavs fan, it is the least funny joke ever. Like, it is just not funny. It's still not funny.
It's not a very funny joke.
It's really not funny. Like April, and you're looking to see, like, is it April Fool's? And it's like, there's nothing funny about this, bro. But I remember, to your point, I stopped in the middle of it was cold that night. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, like probably 10 minutes from my apartment, and I'm just like, wait, what? And I just started cackling, like, what? But I'm cackling for so many reasons, and there's been so many bad trades over the years in general. Like, I ripped the Bulls when they traded Caruso and got no picks back, for Josh Giddey. And like, Giddey obviously is a fine young player. Like, he's been really good lately, but still, there's like players that are good, and there's players that help you win a championship good. And Caruso, for that team where they are in their life cycle, is way more valuable for that aim, right? From that standpoint, and also just knowing how much people around the league value Alex Caruso, I'm of the mindset of like, what do you mean you didn't get any picks? That was how I felt about that. So the idea that Luka is pretty much like a straight up Luka for AD trade when AD is as old as he's not old, but again, it's like, what do you mean you only got one first round? Like, what do you mean you didn't canvas the league? Like, we're sitting here spending a whole podcast talking about 5 picks for Mikal. Like, any team, if you thought that would even be possible, would save up their picks for the rest of time to be able to trade for Luka. Like, it's just, I don't care how out of shape dude is. He took his team to the finals the last time we had a finals. Like, what do you mean? It was just nuts.
Could be drunk on the court, and you don't do that.
Like, you could let him have a beer that Michael Finley wants to take away from him during the game. Like, he would still. Most teams would still want this dude. Like, it was nuts.
That's the element of this that I keep going back to, is that I believe front offices, and this is honestly what I've learned mostly from what we've been doing at Knicks Film School. Like, you can look at just about any trade and at least see why the other team made it if you disagree with it, whether it be salary cap reasons, trying to get younger, or entering into a rebuild, or just shuffling up some things with the roster. Like, there's usually, and this is where I commend John, I commend Jeremy, like, showing the front office perspective has been one of our calling cards. And we're just sitting there like, wait, what's the front office perspective? And then they've offered it to everyone that will give them a microphone. Yeah. They think they won the trade. Like, that's the thing I keep getting back to. They think they won the Luka trade. And everybody else is watching Luka on the Lakers and like, wait, why is he on the Lakers? It still looks weird. He's on the Lakers.
You have to go back to the era that, not completely back to the era that I was writing about in my book, but like the dark years, like right around the time when I first started covering the team, like Bargnani and stuff, where you're just like, you can't articulate a rationale. I was talking to someone about this the other day I remember talking to someone in the Knicks front office years ago when like in your gut, you just know offhand, like this is not going to work. And I remember it's the night before free agency, I'm talking to someone in their front office. I'm like, walk me through why you guys are doing this Joakim Noah signing, like for this money. And
I was having
the person
nice
walks
day,
me
Chris.
through it, and I'm like, I mean, I'm gonna explain like what you're saying, but I don't get it. And I'm just trying like explain it to me like I'm 5 sort of thing. And it's sometimes you can just see it off rip. And it's just it's kind of painful because it's like you can tell there's other stuff that's gotten involved. And I get it. Like you want to set a culture and you feel like Luka's not great for that culture. Fine. But I just think about organizations like the Raiders where they're like, just win, baby. And like Luka will help you win. Even if you think those things about him, try to find other ways to motivate him, try to do other things. Maybe you've tried everything, but like do this at a time where you can canvas the whole league. Like the trade deadline is probably not enough time. I get that you would want to keep that quiet, but keeping it quiet and trading him there, like I know everybody, I would be so tight if I was an executive with another team. I'm like, what do you mean you're going to just trade him for that? Like I would have given you that and then some, and every team would have done that. You know, not every team has AD to trade, but wow, like just from an asset standpoint. And I don't know, it's been a rough year. Like I feel really bad for that fan base. I really do. Just with all the injuries they've had, and that trade is just like such a nasty cherry on top.
Don't feel too bad. They could just be Lakers fan now, and that's great.
They probably will be. Man, that game is coming up in a couple of weeks where Luka goes back.
I know. Yeah.
Holy hell! I was just talking to someone about that the other day, and it's like, wow. I was actually mentioning it to Breen, or Breen and I were talking about it at a game the other day. He's like, yeah, that's going to be something. I was like, yeah, I think so.
Is he calling that game?
I think I got the impression that he was from the way he talked about it. So
that's exciting.
It's the Wednesday games. I think it's it's the ESPN game. He should. That's a pretty important game.
And even if he didn't, like I could imagine that they might ask him. I've never quite understood how that agreement works between him and everything with the Knicks. But
well, there's no Knick game that night, so that should be fine.
That's the kind of game you want him on. Like just like it's the opposite of it is a revenge game for Luka, but like the fans are going to shower that dude with so much adoration. It's just going to be incredible. So I can't wait.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
So, all right, real quick. So I'm going to hand it over to John again. Chris, good to see you. But Chris had mentioned a book that he was writing about. John, would you happen to be able to plug said book? I don't know if you have it handy. I know you held it up before, so this is me alleying it up. But John, what book might he be referring to?
Oh man,
that would be Blood in the Garden: The Flagrant History of the 1990s New York Knicks by
you guys are
Chris
such
Herring.
good people.
And again, it is just the absolute best book out there, and I can't imagine there is a single listener of this podcast or viewer of this YouTube video who has not read Blood in the Garden. If somehow you have not read a book that Barack Obama thought enough of it to put it on his year-on list, if that maybe matters to you. You should go do that right now. And you should also read everything that Chris writes for ESPN. And Chris, it's always great to have you because it's just always such a big day when you come on the podcast.
It's such a pleasure to join you guys. You guys, it's been so fun to watch the growth of the pod and just the nature of the guests that you get. Like it's no, I mean, it makes me feel like an old head to realize, like, just to see the life cycle of, posting and toasting and all these like countless other sites and countless other podcasters. But I genuinely feel like the vast majority of you all in this space are really good people and seem to genuinely care like how I'm doing. And as I said before, like Andrew and I have been trading videos from our weddings and stuff, and we both had essentially beach weddings, and so like tips on that and all sorts of stuff. It means more when you know that it's not just, hey, can we have you on our podcast. It's actually like, there's an actual relationship there beyond that. So it makes me even happier to see the success you guys are having and to see it was funny. Like, John, obviously you are, it's hard I would like to think most Knicks fans are a fan of Thibodeau and have been supportive of Thibodeau. And so even when you start to have the slightest bit of doubt that like there are whole blog posts written about the fact of like, hey, John's tune is changing with regards to this. And he's like, but to see,
Is
like,
that true?
I did see, I saw some Reddit threads, bro. But like, I think
I don't ever pay attention to this stuff. I probably should.
No, I have to read the stuff that people that have a pulse on the fans and what they're thinking, what they're talking about. And, but it speaks to the fact that people really care about what you guys have to say. And that's also because of the amount of work you guys put into what you're doing. You're really analyzing the game closely. You always have, but it's really, really cool to see that reciprocated from the fans, that they care so much about what you're saying, that they're tuning in, that they're subscribing at the rate that they are. And you guys deserve it. You guys have always put work into this and carried yourselves in a really professional manner. And you want to see good people win. And I'm really happy for you guys.
Thank you. If you're talking about caring, the care factor comes through loud and clear from you. It always has. And that's why you are the people's champion, and you always will be. I hope we can have another conversation down the road about whatever it is you might be doing down the road. And in the meantime,
I never finished the second book ever.
I didn't say it out loud.
You didn't say it, but I'm just not going to say the subject. But someday, now that I'm done with the wedding, I have no excuses. But yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
Hold on. This is the most important part of the podcast. You do have an excuse. You know why? Because you're a recently married man and you do not have kids, and you need to milk the shit out of that time. Let me tell you, enjoy every second that you get with your wife now.
Did you see how wide John's eyes got when he said that? He was, have you ever seen Billy Madison when he grabs the kid's cheeks and he's like, stay young.
Stay young.
Yeah. You can. That was literally not just out of space.
Chris, this is a running joke. We'll tell you more the origins of it.
I can't wait to hear it because he was so adamant when he said that.
Me and Fred Katz, like John's whole thing is like, you don't understand. You don't have kids, and it's like, I think I can understand, like,
no, you don't.
Empathy or whatever. Like general emotion. So now everything is
John
like.
looks so adamant as he has the last two times.
Take my advice, for Christ's sake.
Oh my goodness, I believe him though, and I've told my wife the same thing of like, I've suggested a couple times. Let's enjoy the married life for a little bit before we take any big like life steps. Certainly, if we take that one, and she's been ready since before we were married, and I'm like, okay, like so from that standpoint, I know like it really is now or never with regards to me kind of making real progress with this book project. And I also realized when I wrote the last one, the pandemic had hit. And so the league was off for 6 months, and I did not really factor in, man, it's a lot easier to like write and also reach people when everything just stops. Not that I on any level want stuff to stop again, just so I can write my book, because there are more important things in my book. But I'm running out of excuses, and I need to, because I don't have children, I have fewer excuses than other people would have. So I got to make that happen.
Just enjoy life. That's all I ask you to do. I have very few requests. That's all I ask you to do.
You need to let me go before you get yourself in trouble, before the wife listens to this.
If my wife walked in right now, she would say the same.
It's a Macri joint statement there, Chris. Yeah.
We are in lockstep.
It's why I also love that you went and got a dog. Like, as someone who's been editing things that make noise in the background of your pods for years, now there's another thing that makes noise. But yeah,
speaking of which,
my wife is pushing really hard for that too. By the way, literally sends me 4 of them per day on Instagram.
Dog.
Yeah, we may do that.
Fine.
We've talked about doing that maybe first.
Text me any. I'll give you all the dog tips in the world that you want. Okay, this has gone off the rails. Chris, you are the absolute best. I love you so much for continuing to come on and engage with this nonsense with me. Everybody out there, read everything Chris writes on ESPN, and again, go Blood in the Garden. Everybody knows about it. Can't wait to see your continued coverage of the NBA, of the Knicks, of the whole thing. And I think that's it. Thanks everybody for checking out another episode of the Knicks Film School podcast. We'll be back with more fun and games before you know it. Peace out.